Alright, so the next step on getting this 2012 Veloster back on the road is replacing the turbo. So first thing I'm going to do is start disconnecting the stuff up here on top and then go down on the bottom and do that. So we're going to disconnect the ground strap, get the part of the air intake back out of the way, and then we'll see what else we got to get down there. Alright, so the intake tube is out. I have disconnected the ground strap that goes to the top of the intake tube. I put the bolt back in. There is a bracket that goes right here where my finger is. It might be hard to see. The top bolt is a 14, the bottom bolt is a 12. And then on this tube, about where my hand is here, and up here closer to the inlet side, there are two more 12s. From the looks of it, the other thing I did disconnect is the MAC valve. I just unplugged it and then pulled it all. There's a little clippy here you have to disconnect. And so now it looks like I can go down on the bottom and see about taking that apart. So let's go down there and see what we need. Alright, so the first thing you want to do once you get down on the bottom is remove the plastic shield on this side to give yourself a little bit extra room to work with. And then the next thing we're going to be working on, it'll be a little hard to tell, but where this pipe is, there are 3 12s. So you're going to need to come in here. There's not a whole lot of room with the frame right here. So you kind of have to come in with a swivel socket or an adapter and get to those 2 bolts. Now if I remember correctly, I think these are the ones that snap off. I'm not 100% sure, so we'll do that. The other thing we're going to do is take this hot pipe elbow going into the turbo completely out of there. That might give us a little bit more room. So we need to get the pliers and a screwdriver, because I believe the upper one somewhere. Yep, it's right here. So right where my finger is there, well, yours may be in a different spot, but right where my finger is another band clamp that we need to remove so we can undo this part of the pipe. And if your turbo's bad, when you take that off, you might get a puddle. Yeah, it kind of drenched me. And I had just put that back on. So that is all fresh oil coming out of the turbo. So my guess that turbo seal is bad. We'll find out in a minute. Alright, the other thing I did, I went ahead and pulled the passenger's wheel off, put the car on the jack stand on this side. I'm on a ramp on the other side. But this gives me a little bit more access to get up inside there so I can get that cap off. If you got narrow, tiny hands, you might be able to get it off without having to do that, but I kept getting my hand stuck. So that's going to come off next, and this is disconnected. I could go ahead and unplug it, but I'm just going to leave it connected to the turbo and pull it all out together. So, alright, so the next thing is I'm going to get that cap off that's over there on that clamp, get that clamp off and get that small section of tubing out of there, and then I'll start getting those other 2 bolts off of the turbo flange. Alright, to get the 2 lower bolts out, I used the long extension with the swivel, and to get the upper one out, I just used the swivel and the socket. And that was enough for me to snake my hand up there and get it out. You end up with 2 of these washers, or nuts, and a bolt. That's what those 3 are. And apparently those are not the ones that snap off, so it must be the ones on the turbo that I'm thinking about. So now I'm going to go back up on top and pull that pipe out of there. Alright, so that pipe is up and out of the way. So the next thing we need to start looking at is disconnecting the O2 sensors, so they're loose from all these different brackets. We need to get this heat shield out of there. What else do we need to get out of there? So it looks like the heat shield is about 3/10. We'll get that out of the way and then we can see what we're working with. Alright, so the next thing I did was I unplugged the O2 and fuel map sensor bob and just dropped down there so they're out of the way and I can't damage them. And now the next thing I want to do is pull these two, I guess they're oil and return line for the oil. Alright, so I was wrong about two things. One, it's 18 out of 17, and two, it's actually a coolant line, so I didn't drain my radiator, so I have a drip pan down there now. So just be warned. Alright, so there was a heat shield right here against the edge of the motor. It's 210s. Pull that out of the way. I have removed all but two of the exhaust manifold bolts, the top two in each corner. They're still on. And I'm going to go down on the bottom and start pulling the line and see what else I need to get off down there. I don't know if there's another bracket. Oh, there's a bracket on that goes from the motor to the bottom of the turbo. We still have to take off too. So there's a couple of more things we have to do. So let's hop down on the bottom and see what we can get. So I went ahead and hit the two exhaust bolts, this one, and the two down here, that one and that one, so I can take out the cat part, just to give myself a little bit more room. I'm going to let that soak overnight, and it'll also allow me to allow all this liquid to dry up. The other bolt I'm having a slight issue with is this one, right here, right where my finger is. It is the bolt that holds the bracket to the bottom of the turbo. I got it out about, I don't know, 10, maybe 15 turns, and then it just sort of seized up. So I sprayed some PV Buster on it, turned it back in a few turns, turned it back out, and hopefully I can work it out. So the only other thing I need to do at this on the bottom, other than getting those 4 bolts and that one, these two oil line needs to be unhooked so we don't damage it when we pull it out. But I believe once those 4 bolts and that one is out, all I have to do is pull those last 2 upper bolts, and I believe it's out. So we'll see. Alright, so there's the little pipe. I removed all 4 of the 10s and just took it completely out. This way I couldn't damage it at all, and it popped right off, so not a big problem. So like I said, we just got to get the exhaust, those 4 exhaust bolts out and the 1 bracket bolt. I'm going to see if I can find a 1/2 inch 14 laying around here someplace, and we will see about getting the bracket off first. Alright, well, even with some PV Buster on there, as you can tell, I snapped the head right off. So, not a big deal. I do have another turbo, so I'm not worried about trying to get that stupid thing out of there. I just need to get a new bolt. That won't be too much of a difficulty. But yeah, so that's probably going to happen because that bolt is directly bolted into the hottest part of the turbo. So don't be surprised if it breaks off on you. And we got oil dripping out of this, which is normal because that is the return for the turbo, or the oil line for the turbo. I guess it only has 1 oil line and 2 coolant lines. That's fine. Alright, next thing we're going to do is do the 4 bolts holding the exhaust together so we can pull the turbo bolts out of there. Alright, so 4 19s, 2 here on the exhaust and 2 up there on the downpipe from the header. The 2 up at the top have springs, so you just tighten them down and then it basically keeps itself in place. PV Buster did help. Still took a little bit of effort to break them free, but once they started to spin they were fine. So next part we're going to do is see about taking off the last two bolts on the turbo and then figuring out the easiest way to fish it out. I have two different options, so I'll kind of look at both and see what we got. Alright, so I got all the bolts out, and regretfully, get my face out of this oil. Regretfully, the one that I snapped off here is just long enough to be hanging up on this bracket. It's not allowing the turbo to slide back at all. So, what I'm going to do is there's two bolts right here where my fingers are. I'm just going to go ahead and remove these two. That'll pull this bracket out of the way, and then the turbo will be completely out of there. Okay, so these two bolts are 14s, and this one here, depending on how deep your socket and wrench is, may not clear the carrier of the axle shaft. So what I did is I got a long 14 to give me enough leverage to see if I can pull that out of there. We will see. Alright, and I missed a line. There's this heat wrapped silver line that goes up to the top of the turbo from the front side, or the passenger side of the motor here. I need to pull that out of there so we don't bend that tube. So I'm gonna go up on top and disconnect that, and I'll probably disconnect the other one so I can pull the whole tube out so I just don't damage it. So it's a 10 here on this side, right here about my finger is. It's hard to see, but you can trace it to that line. And then I believe the top part of that must be like a 14 or something. Alright, here's a better picture of this line. So there's a 10 at the top, there's a 10 at the bottom, and you're going to need a 10 long, because the short one is just not going to be long enough, or a very short extension. The top one is a pressure fitting with two banjo bolts. It's a 17. Alright, let me finish getting this out of here. Alright, so I should have done this when I had the transmission out, but I didn't because I wasn't sure when the turbo was going to come in. But removing the passenger side axle shaft, and the turbo will slip right through that hole. Bada bing, bada boom. On other videos, I've seen people basically take apart the entire top end of the motor, coils, valve cover, low or high pressure fuel pump. All that stuff has to be off and moved, and then you can fish it out through the top. But if you're going to do any sort of work, new CV joint, anything like that, this would be the much easier way. It took me 15 minutes to get the CV joint out, or CV shaft out, total from the time I started unscrewing it till it's sitting here on the ground. Alright, so after this, what we're going to do is assemble our new turbo. It doesn't have the studs, so I'm waiting for studs to come in, and that'll be that, and then I'll start the video of putting it back together. Alright, so as you can see, the impellers are very worn. There is left and right movement all around, and there is up and down movement, or in and out. So yeah, this turbo impeller was shot, definitely blowing oil back through the intake, up through the intercooler, so that all has to be cleaned out. Every now and then it would blow a smoke, but that was only when like the turbo would try to spool up, and then nothing.